Welcome back to Timeless Tales podcast. Okay, let's do this deep dive. We've got a really extraordinary source in front of us today. It's a personal account from the BBC's WW2 People's War Archive, and it was actually contributed by the daughter of the man who lived through it all, Tommy Collier. And this isn't just a story, it's quite a journey. Tommy Collier started as a London bus driver, joined up, found himself in the RASC, that's the Royal Army Service Corps, doing logistics basically, and gets thrown into some of the most, intense moments of the Second World War. We're talking Dunkirk, North Africa, Greece, Crete, then being a prisoner of war in Italy, and there's pulling off not one, but two escapes. It's almost hard to believe how much one person went through.
Yeah, it really is. And what just jumps out from these personal histories accounts like Tommy's is how they ground everything. You know, they take you beyond the big headlines, the dates, the famous battles, right down to the gritty reality of it. This isn't some dry history lesson. It's Tommy's actual experience, the fear, the cleverness, those little moments of kindness you wouldn't expect, and just sheer grit, survival. It's a powerful reminder that all those huge historical events, they're made up of millions of individual stories just like his.
Absolutely. So our mission today for this deep dive is to really unpack Tommy's incredible story. We want to pull out those moments that, really make you stop and think and try to understand what this huge sweep of history actually felt like for him.
Yeah.
Just a regular guy from London caught up in it all. So, okay, where does it start? He joins the regular army May 1939. He could see war was probably coming. He's a driver in the RASC. By early 1940, he's over on the continent with the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, in France and Belgium.
Right, and this is bang in the middle of the German blitzkrieg unfolding. The BEF moves forward, but, they quickly get outflanked. Overwhelmed, really. And that leads to that desperate scramble back towards the coast, towards Dunkirk.
Which brings us right there. Dunkirk. Tommy's account.
Wow.
Puts you right on those beaches in early June 1940. He talks about the sheer chaos. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers just waiting, completely exposed, and under constant German bombing, machine gunning, having to dive for cover all the time. Just endless noise and fear.
It's almost impossible now to properly grasp the scale of Operation Dynamo, the evacuation itself. I mean, nearly 340,000 Allied soldiers rescued. But Tommy's description, being pinned down like that, the total vulnerability on those flat beaches, it really drives home the danger. For the men waiting and for the crews on those hundreds of boats, big and small, risking everything to cross the channel. How did he say he got off?
He managed to get onto one of the small boats, the ones ferrying men out to the bigger ships waiting offshore. He specifically remembers getting onto a destroyer. And the bombs, just constantly falling. But he really emphasizes the captain's skill. Just incredible nerve, turning the destroyer so sharply to dodge the bombs that men were literally sliding across the deck. He absolutely credits that captain with saving his life, and everyone else is on board. Arriving back in Dover around June 3rd sounds completely disorienting. Soldiers everywhere, confusion. He followed some others onto a train. And here's a detail that really jumped out at me. He hears this loud noise, instantly thinks it's a bomber, and dives under a train seat. Just pure instinct. Then he realizes, it was just another train passing. But in that split second, he knew. He knew he was suffering from what they used to call shell shock.
That detail is, it's incredibly powerful because it's not about the bombs on the beach. It's about the aftermath, the trauma that lingers. It shows how that intense, constant fear just gets, hardwired into you. Even when you're supposedly safe, that hypervigilance, that instinct to dive for cover, it's still right there. What does that tell you? That specific reaction about the hidden costs, the things that don't show up in the casualty lists.
It's just a stark reminder, isn't it, that the battle keeps going on inside, long after you've left the danger zone.
Yeah.
So after getting re-equipped back in England, Tommy's war takes a completely different geographical turn. He gets posted to North Africa, sails in September 1940. A long, long voyage, dodging U-boats all the way, eventually making it to Egypt. And his role changes here. He's not driving anymore. He becomes a corporal cook, gets the nickname Blondie because the desert sun bleached his hair.
Yeah.
And the rations, pretty basic stuff. Tin bacon, bully beef, that canned corned beef and hard biscuits. But he tried, apparently. Even wrote out daily menus to try and make it seem less monotonous.
And you can't overstate how vital that role is. Cooks, supply lines, especially in a place like the North African desert. Vast, difficult terrain. Keeping the troops fed, even if it's repetitive food, is just fundamental for morale, for fighting fitness. It's the essential work behind the lines that often gets overlooked.
Oh, yeah. And he has some classic desert stories, like wanting something different from bully beef. Fair enough. He managed to swap some rations for a sheep from a local kid. Couldn't bring himself to actually kill it, apparently. Someone else had to do that part. But getting fresh lamb, Must have been amazing for morale. And their cooking method. Get this, pour petrol on the sand, light it, and cook over the flames. Pretty ingenious, really.
Resourceful is the word.
Then there are the less
Hmm.
pleasant details. Scorpions. Huge spiders. Everywhere, he said. And for entertainment. Well, this is a bit grim. They'd catch scorpions, draw a circle of petrol around them on the sand, light it, and then watch them fight each other trying to escape the fire. He admits it was cruel, looking back. But he says, it passed the time.
That kind of dark, almost bizarre entertainment, what does it tell us about coping in those really extreme environments? I think it speaks volumes about the psychological pressure, doesn't it? When you're facing constant danger, boredom, monotony, your mind just scrambles for ways to cope, sometimes in ways that seem, well, unsettling from our perspective now. It's about finding any distraction, any release for that tension, even if it seems morbid. It's a kind of survival, too, just not purely physical.
Makes sense. And speaking of sudden changes, after North Africa, boom, he's abruptly sent to Greece, March 1941. Just as the Germans are about to invade, they land near Athens, but the whole situation just collapses incredibly quickly as the Germans push down from Yugoslavia.
Yeah, that was a really tough strategic spot for the British, trying to support the Greeks, but they were just overwhelmed by the speed and power of the German invasion. Another hasty retreat became unavoidable, really, to prevent mass capture.
So another evacuation. This time it's the Royal Navy getting them out, taking them to Crete. He mentions being bombed on the ship on the way, but luckily the bombs missed. And seeing the heavily damaged HMS York sitting in the harbor at Crete, a bad sign. And just a week later, Crete itself becomes the target, one of the biggest airborne invasions of the entire war. And Tommy sees it happen, right there from the harbor near Milan Airport, watches the German paratroopers and the gliders descending. He describes seeing it all unfold, crystal clear, while German planes bomb the harbor area around them. Just unbelievable. Then another tough escape. The roads were basically useless after the retreat from Greece, so they were ordered to march over the mountains. To get to evacuation beaches on the other side of Crete, their retreat was covered by the Black Watch Regiment, finally scrambling onto boats back to Egypt again. It just sounds utterly draining. Physically, mentally, constant retreat and evacuation. Right back in North Africa. Again, November 1941 this time. He joins the 8th Army near Tobruk. And this area, Tobruk, saw some really fierce back and forth fighting against the Germans and Italians. They get an order one day, take a nearby ridge, and this is where Tommy describes this moment of just pure gut feeling, intuition. He tells his driver, a guy named Jock, hang back, stay at the rear of the convoy. He just had this sense that something bad was up ahead. And he was absolutely right. German planes attacked the front of the convoy moments later.
That battlefield intuition, you hear about it so often from veterans, don't you? That gut feeling, that sort of sixth sense that develops from being constantly exposed to danger. It's not just training, is it? It's something more, almost primal. A survival instinct kicking in. It raises that fascinating question, really. How much of survival is skill planning and how much is just sensing something that others don't?
A huge amount, I reckon, based on stories like this. They couldn't dig proper trenches where they were just thin sand over solid rock, so they had to hide under their wagons during the bombing raid. And this leads to one of the most staggering near-miss stories I think I've ever come across. Tommy gets out from under the wagon after the raid, and he sees this massive bomb, huge, like 12 feet high. He said, sticking nose down in the ground, unexploded, just 10 feet away from where they'd been sheltering. It had hit the rock and just didn't go off. His exact words were, that bomb just didn't have my name on it.
Wow, I mean, it's impossible to read that and not think about pure sheer chance. Luck. We talk about strategy, bravery, tactics, but so often surviving combat came down to that. Blind luck, an unexploded bomb, being 5 feet to the left instead of the right. Being on this boat, not that one. Tommy's story seems absolutely full of those moments.
Definitely. He immediately tells Jock, right, let's get out of here now. And officer questions why they're suddenly so far back from the main group. Tommy makes up some excuse about sand in the carburetor. Smart thinking. The officer tells him, yeah, a lot of the wagons up front took direct hits. As they carefully drive away, following what's left of the convoy, he sees this horrific sight. A Bofors anti-aircraft gunner.
Wow.
Just his head gone. After seeing that, Tommy said he just stared straight ahead at the road. Tried not to think, just drive. Process it later. Not long after that, near Tobruk again, they find themselves completely surrounded by the enemy, cut off. They decide on this incredibly daring escape attempt. They're going to drive through the Italian lines at night, under a clear moonlit sky, and navigate simply by looking up at the stars using the Milky Way as their guide. Can you imagine? And he remembers listening to the forces radio during this escape. They were playing Rose of England, a live concert. He said hearing that music just gave them a real lift, kept them going. Says he still gets emotional when he hears that song even today. Understandable.
Those small comforts, music, a familiar song, they take on huge significance in moments like that.
That's definitely. Later on, towards the end of 1942, they're surrounded again. Near El Alamein this time, pushed right back against the sea. He decides to quickly wash the sand out of his hair in the sea, maybe trying to feel human for a second, and gets caught in this ferocious whirlpool. Just dragged straight down. He couldn't swim, not a stroke. But somehow, pure instinct takes over again. He starts doggy paddling frantically. Remembers his heart pounding so hard he could actually hear it in his ears. But slowly, miraculously, he starts coming back up to the surface and gets out.
It's almost unbelievable, the range of threats. Surviving bombs, dodging bullets, escaping encirclements, and then nearly drowning in a whirlpool just trying to wash your hair. His story really hammers home the sheer variety of ways your life was constantly on the line. It wasn't just the enemy. The environment itself could kill you.
It really does. And after surviving that, well, the inevitable finally happens the next day. They come out of hiding, nowhere left to go, and they're taken prisoner by the Germans. And this leads to another one of those remarkable, almost surreal moments. A German officer comes up to him. The officer says to him in English, "For you, the war is over." Then he adds, "I've just come back from leave. My home is in Cologne." Or it was. There's nothing left of it at all. Razed to the ground. And Tommy's response. Bearing in mind he's now a prisoner, completely powerless. It's just incredible defiance. He looks the officer in the eye and says, "Well, the Germans started it all by invading Poland. And the Americans are in the war now. You have no chance of winning." He said later he wondered why the officer didn't just shoot him right there on the spot for saying that.
That takes, well, immense courage. Or maybe just sheer raw conviction boiling over. To say that directly to your captor, fully aware of the potential consequences, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? About his refusal to be broken, his underlying belief in the cause, even at literally his lowest point. What does that moment tell us about holding on to your identity or beliefs even when you're captured?
That even when you're physically trapped, your spirit, your mind, they can still be free, still defiant. So, Tommy is now officially a POW, a prisoner of war. He's put on a ship taken to the Italian port of Toronto. He describes seeing the harbor there absolutely battered by bombing, sunken Italian Navy ships everywhere. The Italian guards apparently told them to look away, not to look at the destruction, but they did look.
Yeah.
And he says all the British POWs cheered when they saw the sunken enemy ships.
It's such a fascinating psychological moment, isn't it? They've just lost their freedom. They're heading into the unknown of captivity. But seeing tangible proof of the enemy suffering a defeat, however symbolic in their own situation, gives them this surge of morale, a shared moment of defiance almost, finding a little victory amidst their own hardship.
Yeah, exactly. They were then driven inland to an Italian POW camp, Camp 17, Bagasso, near Verona. And as he walks into the camp for the first time, he spots a single dwarf kidney bean growing on a plant near the entrance. He quickly grabs it and eats it before anyone else sees. Just a tiny, immediate act of survival, taking whatever tiny bit of sustenance he could find right from the start. Camp life sounds grim. Sleeping in tents pitched on a hillside. Daily delousing, which just sounds horrible. The basic food was apparently chestnut bread, which sounds interesting, and water. So those weekly Red Cross parcels were absolutely crucial. Lifesavers. And he remembers the ingenuity of the men in the camp. Like one guy who managed to make a fully working chiming clock out of empty Red Cross tins. Incredible.
Amazing resourcefulness.
He also mentions the Italians built a church inside the camp compound. He describes it being painted inside with figures, done by supposedly wonderful artists among the prisoners, and learning hymns there. A little bit of solace, maybe. Mostly, though, it was work. They were sent out on work details, hoeing farmland 7 days a week. Tommy ended up being put in charge of a working party, and he tells his great story about cigarettes. They were usually given pretty good quality British cigarettes, daily players or senior service, he remembered. Part of the deal, maybe. Then one day, the Italian guards tell him, "Sorry, no cigarettes today." So Tommy, as the NCO in charge of the work party, just announces, "No cigarette, no lavoro." No cigarettes, no work. The whole party just downs tools, stands there. They get marched back to the camp, rifles pointed at them, the whole 9 yards. But the next day, guess what? They got their cigarettes back. And were marched back out to work, ironically, he noted, into a field full of tobacco plants.
That's brilliant, that small act of, well, collective bargaining, resistance. It just shows you, doesn't it? The power of solidarity, even when you're prisoners. finding leverage where you'd think there was none. It's a perfect example of that human spirit pushing back against total control, finding little ways to assert some agency, some dignity. It's not about escaping the camp at that point. It's about making life inside the camp slightly more bearable, maybe even slightly more on their terms.
It really is.
Yeah.
And besides the main camp work, some prisoners, including Tommy, were sent out to work on local farms. And he actually befriended the Italian family he worked for. He called the farmer Mustachio, presumably because he had one, his wife Malvina, and their kids.
And that adds another layer to the POW experience, doesn't it? It wasn't just guards and wire and deprivation. There were these moments of, well, human connection. Across the official battle lines, it shows how individual people could still interact, find common ground, even when their countries were at war.
Yeah. He talks about experiencing some unexpected Italian pleasures while working at the farm, like helping the family tread grapes to make wine. He vividly remembers stepping into the big vats without washing his feet first, and how lovely and cool it felt on his skin. And this surprising detail, they even made a kind of makeshift whiskey by distilling wine using a fire, some sort of drum, and a tube running through cold water. Resourcefulness clearly extended beyond the camp gates.
Making moonshine whiskey on a farm while a POW, you couldn't make it up.
Right. But after several months of this POW life, that desire for actual freedom just took over. His first escape attempt sounds really impulsive. It was during a big storm one night. He didn't tell anyone, just saw an opportunity, got past the wire somehow, and headed straight for that friendly farmhouse he knew. But it ended pretty quickly. The guards came knocking, looking for him, and the lady of the house, Malvina, called out, "Tommaso, venio qua." "Tommy, come here." Basically gave him up, maybe to protect her family. So he gets escorted back to the main camp, rifles on him again. But as he's marched back through the gates, his mates in the camp see him, and they start cheering him, "Good old Blondie!" clapping and shouting encouragement. He said he promised himself right then and there they wouldn't catch him the next time.
Yeah, escape attempts were incredibly common for POWs. A powerful act of defiance, even though the risks were huge. And honestly, the success rates were pretty low overall. That first attempt might have failed, maybe because it was impulsive, but like you said, it seems it just hardened his resolve, made him determined to plan better for the next chance.
Which brings us to his final, and this time successful, escape. On September 8th, 1943. And that date is really significant.
Yeah.
Because that's the day Italy officially signed an armistice with the Allies. Things were suddenly chaotic.
Right, the whole power structure in Italy was suddenly up in the air. German forces started taking over from the Italians, guards might have deserted. It created opportunities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wasn't entirely sure where he was going initially, just heading south. But after managing to cross the River Po, he was found by an Italian partisan fighter. He ended up joining a group of these partisans who were hiding out in the woods. Their camp sounds very basic, literally living under a large parachute spread between trees. But crucially, they had a radio. And through that radio, Tommy heard the Voice of Britain, the BBC, for the first time in years. He describes listening to the music and then coded messages. They'd broadcast messages for resistance groups all over Europe using colors and numbers. His group's specific color code was white. When they heard white, followed by their number sequence, they knew a plane would be coming over soon to drop supplies, ammunition, maybe clothes, food. What a lifeline that must have felt like.
Oh, absolutely. It instantly connects his small, isolated band hiding in the Italian woods to the much, much bigger Allied war effort. Suddenly, you're not just fighting locally, you're part of this huge continent-wide network. Hearing those codes, knowing support was coming from the sky, must have been incredibly powerful for morale, gave them purpose.
Totally. He mentions raiding local farms for food sometimes, but notes that generally, as partisans, anyone would feed you. Shows the level of local civilian support for the resistance against the Germans and remaining fascists. And listening to that radio, it provided what he called arguably the single most thrilling moment of the entire war for him personally. That was hearing the first reports come through about the D-Day landings, June 6, 1944. He describes hearing the announcer talk about the sky being black with Allied planes, the sea just full of ships off the coast of Normandy.
Just think about that for a second. A former London bus driver, now an escaped POW hiding with Italian resistance fighters in the woods. Hearing the news of the massive Allied invasion of France beginning, crackling over a hidden radio, it just highlights the incredible reach of information even back then, doesn't it? And how vital those moments, hearing about major victories, must have been for morale in isolated groups like his. Gave them hope.
For sure. So some months after D-Day, the partisans decide it's time to try and get Tommy out of Italy altogether. They help plan his route. Part of the plan involves putting him on a train to Milan, so they get him to the station. The train stops, he gets on. and finds himself in a carriage absolutely packed with German soldiers. The partisans had just told him one thing: whatever happens, don't speak. Imagine the tension.
Heart-and-mouth moment, surely.
Must have been. But he makes it to Milan safely. He has a contact there, arranged by the partisans, a member of the Milan Fire Brigade. This fireman hides him, arranges an apartment for him to stay in, but gives him a strict warning: never, ever look out of the window. Because Mussolini's fascist black shirts still march past on the street below every single day. Can you imagine being that close to freedom, yet still having to hide like that? The constant fear of discovery? And there's another slightly unsettling but very memorable food story from his time hiding in Milan. His first meal provided by his hosts. They told him it was rabbit stew, but he said it looked and smelled exactly like cat. He just couldn't bring himself to eat it. Said it made him feel quite ill just looking at it.
Food scarcity was extreme in occupied areas. People ate what they could get. Still, not ideal.
Not ideal at all. So after some time laying low in Milan, the partisans arranged the final leg of his escape, getting him and another escaped POW he'd met, called Bill Fuller, towards the Swiss border. They had to walk the entire way, through rough country, heading for the mountains. Tommy said he had a bottle of brandy tucked away in his pocket, ready to celebrate the second they crossed into neutral territory. They walked carefully, using cover, hiding from German border patrols, which were apparently quite frequent. The partisans had given them precise instructions exactly when and where to cross the border, pointing out a specific spot where they could slip under the frontier wire fence, and they made it. Into Switzerland, freedom. The immediate reception sounds pretty intense, though. As soon as they were across, they were stopped by Swiss border guards with an Alsatian dog. But the guards apparently guessed he was English, despite his ragged clothes, maybe his appearance. Then some Swiss civilians came up. They asked if Tommy and Bill were Germans. When they replied, "No, we're English," the civilians started clapping and cheering right there. What a moment that must have been.
Relief, validation, after everything. Incredible.
Yeah. In the guard room, first things first. Bread and cheese. Probably tasted amazing. Then they were sent to a holding camp for escaped Allied personnel. And at the camp, they were told everyone had to get their hair cut short. Standard procedure, hygiene maybe. But Tommy, having survived so much, wanted to keep his hair. So he told a little white lie. He claimed he was an officer, and apparently officers were allowed to keep their hair longer. And it worked. They let him keep it.
Still got that defiant streak, even in freedom.
Absolutely. And he shares this incredibly moving memory from that time in the Swiss camp. It was near Christmas 1944. There were soldiers from many different Allied nations in the camp: British, American, French, Polish, others. And they all gathered together and started singing Silent Night. But each national group sang it in their own language, simultaneously. He said he remembered that moment so clearly, the sound of it, like it was yesterday.
Wow, that is such a powerful image, isn't it? These men, brought together by this terrible global conflict, finding this moment of shared humanity, shared solace, through one simple, universal Christmas carol, sung in all their different languages at once. It just transcends all the borders and divisions of the war, doesn't it? Beautiful.
Truly. So, from Switzerland, he was eventually moved on, sent to Lyon in France, which was now held by the Americans, for interrogation, debriefing, basically. And there's this slightly strange, unexplained incident. The American officer interrogating his mate, Bill Fuller, said something odd to Tommy afterwards. He apparently said, "Your friend there, he's no more English than I am." Tommy said he never found out what that meant, never understood it, but he and Bill parted ways at Paris airport. Tommy was the only one put on the plane heading back to Britain. Bill was held back for some reason.
Little mystery there.
Yeah. Anyway, that flight took Tommy back to London. He landed on British soil on January 1st, 1945. After everything he'd been through since 1940, he describes just the sheer feeling of being home. And one of the very first things he did back in London was find Bill Fuller's family, to let them know that Bill was alive and safe, even if he wasn't home just yet.
That's a lovely touch, a simple act, but so important for that family, looking out for his mate.
Yeah. He spent the next 11 months or so back in the Army at various barracks in the UK, before finally being demobbed, discharged in March 1946. He got leave passes for both VE Day and VJ Day, which must have felt amazing. And he kept in touch after the war with that Italian family, Mustachio and Malvina, who'd been kind to him, and with the fireman in Milan who hit him. Though he later received news that the fireman had actually been arrested by the authorities after the war, possibly suspected of being a spy or double agent. Another little wartime mystery. But looking back on all those years, all those near misses: Dunkirk, the desert bomb, the whirlpool, the escapes, Tommy was just profoundly aware of how many times he'd stared death in the face and somehow walked away. As a lifelong Christian, his own explanation, his deeply held belief, was simple. Someone was watching over me.
And it's fascinating when you read the comments left by people on the BBC archive page where his daughter shared his story. That sentiment really resonates. You see people reflecting on how he was, as one person put it, thrown in at the deep end right from the start, and how incredibly lucky or blessed he was to survive it all. Many explicitly agree with his feeling that it genuinely seems like someone was watching over him given the sheer odds he overcame. His personal faith clearly strikes a chord with others reading about his experiences.
Wow, just what a story. So, to sort of recap this whole deep dive into Tommy Collier's war, I mean, the sheer breadth of it, from the hellish beaches of Dunkirk to the scorching heat and desperate ingenuity needed in the North African desert, the chaos of the retreat from Greece and the invasion of Crete, then life as a POW in Italy, the hardship, but also those moments of defiance like the cigarette strike and the unexpected human connections. Then, the danger and hope living with the Italian partisans, their heart-stopping train ride surrounded by Germans hiding in Milan, and finally that walk across the mountains to freedom in Switzerland. It's an entire war condensed into one man's experience.
It truly is, and his story is such a powerful testament, isn't it, to human resilience, first and foremost, to ingenuity, whether it's figuring out how to cook with petrol or how to make a clock from tins or stage a strike, and also to the vital importance of those small moments of human kindness, often found across enemy lines. And maybe above all, it starkly illustrates the sheer unpredictable role that luck, or, as Tommy himself saw it, perhaps something more than luck played in determining who survived and who didn't under such extreme, relentless pressure.
Absolutely. These are the personal narratives, aren't they? These timeless tales, if you like, that really allow us, years later, to grasp the true individual human impact of these enormous global events like World War II. Listening to an account like Tommy Collier's, what does it make you reflect on? Maybe about your own capacity for resilience or just the sheer unpredictability of life.
And maybe the final thought we can leave you with today, after journeying through Tommy's incredible life, given that staggering number of close calls, the unlikely escapes, the moments saved by pure instinct or sheer chance, does Tommy Collier's own deeply held belief that someone or something was actively watching over him resonate with you? Or do you lean towards interpreting his survival as an extraordinary but ultimately understandable convergence of luck, his own skill and tenacity, and the timely help of others he encountered along the way? What does this powerful personal story ultimately suggest to you about the balance between fate and human action when everything is truly on the line?